Hello and welcome everyone to the virtual Marlene Meyerson JCC Manhattan. My name is Megan Whitman and I'm the director of the Lambert Center for Arts and Ideas. I hope we find each of you safe and healthy at home. I'm thrilled to welcome you to Authors in Quarantine Community Book Talks with Julie Baer. The JCC's Lambert Center has an exciting fall season of virtual programs featuring guests like Mo Rocca on September 30th, Jeffrey Toobin on October 21st, and the incredible Jamie Floyd, who will guide us through the headlines the day after the presidential election on November 4th. As part of our effort to remain connected during this unprecedented time, we're inviting community to these programs free of charge. We know that so many are in challenging circumstances right now. But if tonight brings you joy and connectivity, which I think it will, and you are able to make a gift of any size, you will help in our ability to remain a vibrant community supporting one another. We've made it simple. Please just text the word community to 56512. Again, that's community to 56512. Tonight's conversation is in the capable hands of our friend Julie Baer. A native New Yorker, Julie began her career as a bookseller at Shakespeare and Company. Her first job in publishing was at Sanford J. Greenberger Associates. Julie started her own agency, Baer Literary, in 2004. In 2015, with 3 other partners, she launched the Book Group. Julie represents a variety of writers across the literary spectrum with a special emphasis on fiction. Books she represents that were published in the last year include Inheritance by Danny Shapiro, Nothing to See Here by Kevin Wilson, Book of V by Anna Solomon, Patsy by Nicole Dennis Ben, and Dear Edward by Ann Napolitano. And I can tell you I've read all those books and I highly recommend them. They're all great. There will be time for questions from the audience tonight, so please feel free to submit yours at any point during the conversation by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And lastly, if you have yet to read tonight's featured book, I encourage you to order through bookshop.org, which supports independent booksellers, and they really do need your support. So join me now in welcoming Julie Baer.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be here with all of you and to be here with the wonderful Courtney Sullivan. I'm so excited to be talking to you tonight. And this is Courtney's latest magical novel. All of her novels are wonderful. This is the newest one. And I really encourage all of you who haven't had a chance to pick it up to go get your copy, bookshop.org. Courtney, thank you for joining me tonight.
I'm so happy to see you. It's so lovely to see your face.
I know, so close and yet so far.
I know.
I'm going to start with a question I've been asking everybody I've talked to, which is, can you talk a little bit about what your writing routine and space was like in the before times?
Oh my.
And then, I know, if you can cast your memory back there. It doesn't make you cry.
My person.
Yeah, we might all burst into tears, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you can talk a little bit about how that's changed.
Yeah. So in the before times, I lived in Brooklyn and had, I think most importantly, the most wonderful nanny in the world cared for my 2 children. And my kids are 16 months apart. So my daughter is not yet 2 and my son turned 3 in June. So when we had a full-time nanny in those wonderful, beautiful days of yore, I wrote at the Brooklyn Writers Space. My home. I went there most days and, just drank coffee and wrote in silence, and it was really lovely. So we just started to have childcare again after 6 months of no childcare. And that was a challenge. That was a real challenge. I was writing at one point an op-ed for the New York Times, sitting in the driver's seat of my car while my kids were playing in like a heap of dirt beside me in a park. At least we were in a park. I was just watching them like out of the corner of my eye, like, well, this is the only way I can get this done. So I will just have to pay for that at bedtime.
Yeah.
Bath time. So yeah, it's been a little different. What I have experienced though is my first two published novels, when I was writing them, I had a full-time job. I worked at the New York Times. I was a researcher for two of the opinion columnists, for Bob Herbert and Gail Collins. And I could only write my novel on the weekends or late at night. And so I think writers do tend to be either, the early morning shift or the late shift, like either before everyone else in the household has woken up or after they've gone to sleep. And I was always a late night writer. And so even when it became my full-time job and I was lucky enough to be able to write, at any time, I've always done my best writing, like between 11 and 11 p.m.
Wow. Even after you had kids and you became the exhausted mother that we all become when we have children.
Yeah. But, especially after my daughter was born, I think I was in a weird sort of, I don't know what the heck was going on, but I wish I could get it back because it was amazing. I would just be up like all night writing, and then she'd wake up at 2 a.m. for the 2 a.m. feeding. I would feed her, and that's when I would go to sleep, and that's when I would stop writing. But right after I finished my book, right before COVID struck, and as soon as I finished it, it's like I crossed the finish line. And I just kind of looked up and I was like, oh my God, I'm really tired. Like, really tired.
Yeah.
Good thing, I'm going to have
good times. Great timing. Yes. I imagine that both the challenges of not having childcare, of being exhausted, of having just finished this book, combined with all of the things that we're going through as a country and as a world, have really affected your creative mind.
Yeah.
Has it been hard? A lot of writers I talk to are saying it's really, some are saying it's really hard to find time to focus, find the mental space to focus. And some other people have sort of like dived in, like, I need the distraction of my creative work.
Yeah. I think just the point I'm at with the new book I am sort of working on, I will use that term very loosely and lightly. But I have a proposal for a new book that is done, which I think is good because I know what the book is. I know the bones of the book, and it's alive in my head. So I am thinking about it a lot. The characters are coming up a lot, even if I'm not really writing fabulous prose every day, which I'm not. But I am finding it incredibly difficult to focus on fiction in this moment when life is truly stranger than fiction, and every day seems to bring new horrors, and so many people are in such dire straits for all different kinds of reasons that it's challenging to say, well, the most important thing right now is to go into this place and write my make-believe characters, right? But I think I'm also at this stage with this new thing where I'm not totally fully in it yet, in the world of it yet. And I do hope that maybe that will change. But especially between now and the election, is anyone doing
anything?
Stress
eating? I mean,
I went to Smith, and they have something at Smith called Mountain Day every year where classes are canceled and you can go frolic in the mountains. And so, they always tell alums when it's Mountain Day, and yesterday was Mountain Day. And so, my group of college friends, somebody texted and said, Happy Mountain Day. I really want to just kind of do the bare minimum at work today. And someone else was like, isn't that what we've all been doing for the last few months? Like, you do more than
very funny. That makes me think of a question I was going to ask you later, but I'm going to skip ahead to it because there's so much about friendship and women's friendship in this novel that's so wonderful and so rang so true for me and so deep. And I was telling our mutual friend and your agent, Brittany Bloom, when I finished the book, I had this instinct to immediately call some of my old friends, specifically from college, that I had lost touch with, and was sort of, at war with myself about that guilt that those friendships had kind of fallen away.
Yeah,
But I think also something that your book does is remind us that there are certain friendships are meant for a certain time in our lives,
totally.
and that having those, some last forever and some don't, and that's okay. And I thought that was really beautiful, and I wondered if you could talk a little bit about friendship, um, what role that played for you in the writing of this book.
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you. And I love that the book had that effect on you
Thank
because
you.
I think, for me personally, friendships with other women are so like they've always been important to me and they become more so, I think,
Mhm.
at each new stage of life. And I feel very lucky because I am the kind of person who I still am really close to my childhood friends. I grew up on a street with six girls all my age, and we're still close to this day. In fact, four of them live on the street we grew up on and are raising their own families there.
And now you're
And I
back.
now live in the same town.
That's
Um,
crazy.
yes, so I see them a lot, and
Wow.
I but even when I didn't see them a lot, those friendships were such that we really maybe saw each other, or I saw them because I lived in New York. I saw them once a year at Christmas. That was
Yeah.
pretty much it. But still, we would always just plug right back in where we were, right? And so I have those friendships. I still have, my best friend from high school has always been. We were roommates in New York City, and then we never lived more than a 10-minute walk from each other after that.
Mm.
And my best friends from college too, who I will be doing my weekly Zoom call with as soon as this is over tonight. We
Oh,
do a
so
weekly Zoom.
nice.
So I feel like um, I have those lovely, friendships that have lasted through the decades. But there are also friends who you meet and you strike up this really intense bond, and
Yeah.
it might not last forever. And generally, there's some thing that draws you together, and I think when you're a new mother, that's certainly one of the moments, right? When
Hmm.
you connect with these other women, and you might not actually have anything else in common, but it doesn't matter because you're both
Right.
in the trenches of this thing. The
Yeah.
other sort of life experience I had that maybe informed this book a bit, other than the direct, there was a relationship I had my senior year of college as a babysitter with a mom, which we can talk about.
I do want to talk about that. Yes.
But indirectly, I've been thinking about it since I published the book. When I was writing my book, The Engagements, I wrote about Frances Garrity, who was the woman who wrote A Diamond is Forever, who was the only real person I've ever written about in fiction. And in the process of writing that book, I interviewed the woman who took over for her at the ad agency in 1970. Her name was
Yeah.
Deanne Dunning. And so Deanne was this young hotshot in 1970 who, kind of took over for Frances and was really the first woman to ever reach sort of senior levels at that ad agency.
Wow.
Very Mad Men kind of a moment. But we just became really dear friends, and we used to have dinner once a month and see each other, a
Wow.
lot and talk a lot. And we would just have these fabulous dinners where, the kind of thing where my husband would be texting me like, "Are you okay?" Because we had been at Cafe Loop for 5 hours,
Wow.
And yeah. And unfortunately, Deanne passed away 3 years ago now, 2 years
So
ago, 2 years ago
sorry.
now. And first of all, I only realized when I went to her memorial that she was 80 years old. I never really thought about her age. Isn't that weird? She was so youthful.
Yeah.
She was more
Yeah.
youthful than a lot of my friends who were 40. She just
Wow.
had such a cool energy about her, and she was still so interested in so many things. So of course, I knew she was older than me, but when I went to her memorial and they said she was 80 years old, I was like stunned by that. Isn't that crazy? And
It is a little
that
crazy.
friendship, it just, I don't know. It was just kind of this moment in my life where like I didn't even know how to tell people about that. I actually didn't really tell anyone because they say, "Oh, my friend passed away." Well, but she was 80. Like it's like
Right. Right.
a weird thing. But I did feel profoundly this loss of a friend for the first time,
Yeah.
who I was in the midst of a friendship with. And I think
Yeah.
friendships between women of different ages. There's something really interesting about that. And
Agreed.
certainly the women in this book are separated by, I think, about 15 years.
Yeah.
And that makes a huge difference in the way they
And not just years, but they're where they are in their lives is
yeah.
so different. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired this book and your own personal story that is in there?
Yeah. So Friends and Strangers, for people who haven't read the book, Friends and Strangers is about these two women, Sam and Elizabeth. Sam is a college senior. She's just been abroad and met this British boyfriend who's much older, and she thinks he's just fabulous. And maybe they're going to get married, maybe not. Who knows? Who knows? Elizabeth knows. Elizabeth, who is
she sure does.
that Sam babysits for, and she Elizabeth has just had a different life stage. She's married. She's just had her first baby. She's just left New York and moved to upstate New York, and so she's left the city and moved upstate. And it's like she can look at Sam's relationship, and within 5 seconds, she's like, "Oh, that's not going to last very long." But Sam is plagued by it for a whole year trying to figure that out. So these two women, each really at a crossroads, I would say, in her life, they find each other and they become really intensely connected. But their relationship is, it's tricky because one of them employs the other. So there's that big piece. And there's also the element of Elizabeth being so much further along in her life and knowing all the answers to, or thinking she does anyway, to what will be best for Sam, but really having no clue about where she herself is in her life.
Right. And some of the answers that Sam needs, she has to live through in order to get to them, I think.
Exactly. That's so yes, no, like you make me think of my sister is 9 years younger than I am, and I feel like our entire lives I've been like, don't do this thing, do this thing. Middle school will be better.
Oh, I'm sure she appreciated that so much.
And of course she listened to every single thing I said and had no problems. But no, yes, it's like you have to make certain kinds of mistakes for yourself. That's the only way you learn. So, that Elizabeth is kind of trying to spare Sam pain and wasted time, but you kind of have to have pain and wasted time in your 20s.
Yeah. And so you were once a Sam.
Thank you. I forgot the question. So, thank you. So Sam was very much based on my senior year at Smith. I had an inappropriately aged British boyfriend, and we would have met in the middle of Leicester Square when he was wearing a spacesuit. But that didn't get into the book because I think it seemed too over the top. The real story. But I came back to Smith to finish my senior year. I had actually taken a year off and worked as a nanny in London for the year. And my senior year, I took care of this little baby girl. Her mother's name was Catherine, and Catherine had just moved from New York City to Northampton and was an artist. And really, we would have these very deep talks. And I felt like she, in many ways, kind of put me on the path to moving to New York and having the life of the writer that I have had. So about 10 years after I graduated, we had fallen out of touch. She had twins a couple years after we knew each other. So she then had 3 children, very close in age. And we just had fallen out of touch, as you do with, your babysitter from years earlier. And 10 years had passed. I was back at Smith to give a reading, I think from Maine, my second novel. And I came out to the street afterward, and it was just starting to drizzle rain. It was very cinematic. And this big SUV pulled up to the red light, and behind the wheel was this like mom, and she was talking to her 3 kids in the back seat. And when she turned around, I realized that it was her. And I was waving like, "Oh my gosh, it's me, hello." And she had no idea who
you were.
And so I went back to New York that night. I was telling a friend who's also a writer, Jamie Attenberg, this story over dinner. And she's like, "That would be such a great first scene, in a novel, the 2 women in the car." And I was like, yeah. And, I think when you're a writer, certain events do have this kind of shimmer around them that, I'm going to write about that, but it may not be right this minute I'm going to write about that. And so I didn't write that story then because I wasn't exactly sure what would I say, but it was in my
Right.
head. And it was when I was pregnant with my first child that suddenly this story really started to take shape, because I realized, okay, I've been the babysitter, I can write that part. And
Yeah.
soon enough, I will also be the other one, the mother. And I would love to write really this kind of back and forth between them, which ultimately is kind of just like a conversation with my younger self.
It's amazing. And did you find, I mean, was one perspective harder to write than the other, or more fun to write than the other?
Well, when I was pregnant, that's when I was mostly writing Sam, because I
Yeah.
know, I was like, I've written many mother characters before becoming a mother,
Right.
right? So it's
Right.
not a prerequisite, but I knew that this book was going to be really, some of my books they span 50 years and there's
Yeah.
generations, and this is a much tighter focus of a story. And so I knew that it was going to really hinge more on tone and voice, and really what goes on inside these women's heads, and that it
It's
would
so intimate, I think, in their
yeah.
in within them. Yeah.
And I felt very happy to have it be really personal, in the sense of, I'm not Elizabeth. We have a lot of differences. But I mean, unfortunately, one of them is she has a huge trust fund and I don't. I wish.
Although
But
she chooses not to avail herself of it.
true. That's true. But the motherhood stuff. When I
Yeah.
was pregnant, and even just trying to get pregnant before I was pregnant. I mean, that was the first time since college that I was really taking notes all the time.
Wow.
In college, I was still in the habit of having a diary, and I haven't done that since. And I wouldn't call it a diary exactly, but I was, for the first time, writing down things that were happening all the time,
Right.
because they were so, it was just a different world, and I remember at one point a fertility doctor saying to me, your uterus is like the Holiday Inn, and I'd like
Oh
to
my
see it.
God, that
I'd like
line.
to see it be the Four Seasons. And I'm like, that.
I
What can I
You're
possibly
like, how
do?
can I not use that line?
Yeah,
I've
now
got
I have
to use.
a novel just so I can use that line. So, all of that stuff. I mean, looking back on it, I think most of my books have required a great deal of research. I'm very interested in kind of getting into worlds that are unknown to me. But with this book, I did not feel the lack of that, because new motherhood was a world unknown to me. And I was constantly doing research just in my day to day existence.
Your own, right.
So I felt after Leo was born, when I was pregnant, I was like, oh, I'm really enjoying writing Sam. This is so much fun.
Yeah.
And I don't think I'm going to want to write this mother character, especially because I'm going to be in the midst of it. And will I really want to also then, when I'm not being a mother, am I going to want to sit down and write about being a mother?
Right.
But oh, I really did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's why you did it so well. It feels so fresh and true. But I wonder, given your closeness to these characters, um, both of them, I mean, there's a lot of uncomfortable secrecy in this book. Both characters make a couple of really, I mean, they're great moments of tension, right? You're just like, oh, why are you doing that? Don't do that. Or rather, like, tell, don't keep that secret. And I mean, it was almost so hard when it's that great moment of fiction when you love a character and you're really invested in them, and then they do something stupid and you're like,
Yes.
And I wondered if being close to them made it hard to make them make choices that you were like, this is a terrible choice to be making, and yet I'm going to just make you make that choice.
Yeah.
And also, I guess alongside that, what was interesting to you about, I mean, secrecy is, there's a lot about secrecy in here, and whether that was something very conscious for you or not.
Yeah. I think that, whenever you talk about the jumping off point for a novel, of course, it really is just a jumping off point. So, the woman whose baby I took care of, she did invite me over a couple of times to watch 6 Feet Under, which I was thrilled by. And I remember going over for dinner and having roast chicken, which I was also thrilled by. I felt like they were just so grown up that they roasted chickens and they had multiple plates.
The ultimate, right.
So fabulous. But our relationship did not cross, crazy boundaries as the one in the book does. And I think that's the fun of being a novelist, is taking like the seed, the germ of the idea, and just blowing it up. Like, what if this had happened instead? What if whatever? So I think I didn't feel pain about having them do it, because that's the really like delicious part about writing fiction, is the sort of taking real life and just exploding it to this other level of drama and intrigue. And I do think that the secret piece of it, it's funny because I recently was thinking that I used to get very annoyed when I was really young, like when I was in my early 20s, mid 20s, maybe even my early 30s. I would get really annoyed by so many novels, because I would think, God, why wouldn't the person just say it? Why wouldn't they just
say
it? Like everything would have been fine if they could have just said the thing. And somehow now it's much easier for me to understand when the character doesn't just say the thing. I don't know what that means about me or about whatever.
I think that means that you understand it's complicated, telling the truth is not as black and white, or telling the secret is not as black and white as we would like to think it is when we're younger, or maybe more self-righteous, or, our lives are less complicated.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I also thought it was really interesting, this idea of friends, and can you really be friends with somebody you work for, or somebody who works for you?
Yep.
And not just in the nanny or babysitter, nanny parent, which is its own incredibly fraught relationship because it's your child and there's so much stuff wrapped up in that, but just, when you have that power dynamic, how true and real can the friendship get?
Yes. I think also recently I was talking to somebody about my first job in New York. I worked at Allure magazine. I was an assistant, and there was this, so I was like 21, 22, whatever. And there was this group of women who, they were all 35. I remember that very clearly, because that's so old. Like, oh my God.
Very grown up too.
They were senior editors. So that was also to me like, I'm an editorial assistant. They are senior editors. So that is crazy. And I just was sort of dazzled by these women. And a lot of them were just like so kind to me, so generous to me. And there were a couple in particular who would take me out for dinner. One I think of a lot. She would take me to really lovely, nice restaurants I could never afford on my own.
Right.
She would never let me pay. And even when I got to be much further along in my career and we would still go to dinner, she would never let me pay. And I then had someone who was like a couple years behind me, who was a young journalist, and I always took her out. And to this day, now I'm almost 40, she's probably 37, right? But like, we will never pay when we go out.
Yeah.
And it's like this literal pay it forward, I guess, thing. But, this sense of like older women supporting younger women. I can remember, though, that when I was in that sort of mentor capacity, I was at Allure, I can remember thinking, these women have everything I want. They don't have like 4 roommates, they have their own apartments. They have these like mature relationships, maybe. They have great jobs.
It looks like it on the outside, at least.
Exactly. But then I would always think like my ace in the hole, like, but they're 35. Oh my God. Like they're so old. Like at least I'm, have all my ahead of me.
Yes.
I think, as I've gone along in my career, I remember going to coffee shop in Union Square with this young writer. I know. I can't believe that.
With those French fries. Those were such good. The
Yes,
little
so good.
green. Yeah. So good.
And I took this girl there, and I was probably, 32 or something at the time, and she was a recent college grad. And she said, all the waitresses here are models. Like, they're all models. And I said, yeah, it's always been that way. Like, from the time I graduated college, it's always been that way here. And she goes, really? Even then? And how long do you think it's been since I
You're
graduated?
like, yes, back in the Stone Age.
Yes, it was very clear that, I've shifted over. I've gone to the other side of this
Yes.
now. And so, I don't know, I think, with Elizabeth and Sam, Elizabeth views it, and Sam too, in a way, almost like it's not an equal friendship.
Right.
They like it for that reason. Elizabeth likes the one who knows more and can bestow wisdom, because she feels so freaked out and lost in her own existence.
Well, she seems almost to need the friendship more in a way.
Oh, I think she definitely does. And I, she being new in town, being this woman who, and also being someone who leaves New York. I mean, New York really will ruin you for life, because you go anywhere else and it just doesn't feel as alive or as sparkly. And so Elizabeth, a lot of it is her own snobbery, and she even knows that, but she can't
help herself. Yeah.
She goes to the neighborhood book club, and she knows that
she's such a snob. Oh my God. There is a lot. There's an interesting, I thought you played really wonderfully with snobbery, and also a lot with class in this book. A lot about class and class difference. And I think also interestingly, sort of how we make judgments about what we assume other people, there's this moment when she takes Sam out for dinner and she's like, it's just so cheap here, and you're just like, you can just like see, in your mind's eye, you're like, that is a regularly priced dinner, because New York City, like, dinner is insane.
Exactly. It's so much about that dynamic, the power dynamic. So I remember going to this Italian restaurant in Northampton when I was in college, and like, I think I went there like 3 times, and it was a big deal to go there.
Yeah.
Because it was so expensive. I mean, you only really went there if someone's parents were visiting or something. And then I remember going with my husband, when I was on book tour, and I was like, this place is really expensive, but it's great. And then we went in, and I was like, oh my God, no, this is like really pretty cheap compared to now we've lived in New York for 15 years and whatever. So that sense that, what to Sam is something you have to like save up for, and it's a huge deal, is just this tossed off thing to Elizabeth. And it's partly their age, but it's also, as you said, very much where do they each come from. Sam is so she's from a middle class family, really, but she is, in a way, as a lot of middle class families are, struggling financially. So she knows that her student loan debt is on her shoulders, and she has done the math and knows that if she skips one English class because it's too cold to walk across the quad, she's just thrown.
It costs a certain amount of money. Right. I thought that was amazing. Also, the moment she discovers how much Elizabeth's soap costs.
Yes.
And Elizabeth's like, I got it at the drugstore. And we're just like, $48 soap at the drugstore.
I mean, I remember going with one of my dearest friends who grew up really like I did, very middle class. And we went to another friend's Hampton's house, and my friend was like, she was going absolutely crazy. She's a very like reasonable human, but she was like, you see this soap costs, $60. Like she just couldn't believe it. And that is, I think sometimes you, especially if you are kind of, not experienced in this world as Sam is, you think, wow, this other person just does everything perfectly. How does she make her life so beautiful and effortless? And the answer is with heaps of money.
Yes. Always. Yes, exactly. All right, I'm looking at my notes because I know there were so many things that I wanted to ask. I want to ask you about George and the hollow tree, and a beautiful acknowledgement that you have to your mom in the book about teaching you about the hollow tree. Maybe you can, for people who haven't read the book, just talk a little bit about that and where that came from for you and what it meant to have that be part of a story.
Yeah. So George is Elizabeth's father-in-law, and Elizabeth and her husband have moved upstate, partly to be closer to her in-laws, and they are in a really different social class than she is. Her father-in-law has made a living his whole life with a small car service, and Uber has basically come along and wiped him out. And so, his response to that at first is to feel, as many people do in that position, personally responsible, and like a failure. But he kind of learns over time and becomes obsessed over time with this idea that, wait a minute, it's these institutions that have failed. It's the social safety net that has failed, not me, not these individuals. Right. And the sort of raising up of the gig economy. And isn't it great that, so many Americans are employed, but it's like, well, what is their employment and what jobs do they actually have? And can they live off
and
of
what security do they have? And
and so my mom several years ago started talking about this, she called it the hollow tree. She said, it looks like everything, on the surface, it looks like everything's fine and America is as it was. But when you dig further, you see that there's really nothing holding it all up. And so many people are just sort of hanging on by a thread. And I think the fact
which I had to say that the pandemic has shown, I mean, has shown in just a horrifying way how close people are living to having nothing and no safety.
That is exactly right. It's like the book happened to come out right in the middle of this pandemic. And yes, immediately you saw, tens of thousands of millions of people, millions of Americans every week, unemployed, no health insurance in the middle of a pandemic, and so on. And so this sense of, how does the individual's life get impacted by larger, more corporate decision making?
Right.
Something that's really, alive for George, but also it kind of has these tentacles where once he starts seeing it, he can't stop seeing it. And he does sort of annoy his family members with it because it's so constant. And over time, Elizabeth really doesn't want to hear about it, but actually Sam who strikes up this interesting friendship with George and tells Elizabeth, kind of repeatedly, like, George is making a lot of sense. And it isn't until pretty far along that Elizabeth realizes that maybe she hasn't wanted to hear this message because she's complicit in it.
Yes, 100%.
Sort of blamed,
Yeah. I thought that part was so fascinating. I want to segue from that, and clearly your interest in that, to work that I know you were doing a lot of in the before times. I'm not sure how much possible now, but with immigrant families together. And I thought maybe this would be a great time for you to talk to our readers and our JCC friends about that work,
absolutely,
and that organization.
So, Immigrant Families Together is a group that formed so this was 2 summers ago. Yes. So two years ago, this past June, when the Trump administration started separating mothers and children at the border. And for me personally, at that time, my son was just turning 1. It was the week he turned 1. I will never forget it. And I was 6 months pregnant with my second child. So I was so in the headspace of babies. And I think every day there are stories in the news that we feel we cannot tolerate, yet we tolerate them because we don't know what to do. So we just think, oh my God, that's so horrible, I can't live with that. And then we live with that. But then every once in a while, there's something, no, you truly can't just let that go by. And so when this came up, I just couldn't bear it. And every time my son cried, I thought about, oh my God, the way that only a child's mother or caregiver knows how to soothe that particular child, and to just all of a sudden have your child ripped from you, I couldn't believe it. So I was looking for something to do, some way to help more, more than just donating, which I was doing as well. And I found out that this woman, who is absolutely incredible, a mom of 3 kids in Queens, had started this grassroots group. She started with just one mother, where she raised the bond, because part of the issue for these moms is that the federal government was setting their bond at the level that had previously been set for, vicious, violent offenders. So a mom who has nothing is crossing the border, and they set the bond at $20,000. Well, there's no way she's ever going to be able to post that. So we were raising bonds, posting bonds, going to the ICE office and physically posting the bond, because someone has to do that. And then setting up means of transportation for these mothers. So a lot of them were detained in Arizona or Texas, and the kids were sent as far away as New York. So or Massachusetts. So we would then, depended on the mother, set up maybe a caravan of drivers across the whole country to get them to their kids. If they could fly, we would fly them, but that could be complicated with ID and all of that. So we ended up, I think there are about 10 of us in this core group of volunteers, and all of us are mothers. All of us have full-time jobs, but it became a full-time job. And really that is why I was writing in the middle of the night when my daughter was an infant, because I was doing this all day. And we just became experts, we became so immersed that now I know immigration attorneys in every city in this country. And, we just became so immersed in this world. And what we did, so I think at last count, we bonded out maybe 120 moms.
Wow, Courtney, that's amazing.
Thank you. And then
incredible.
We pledged to support on an ongoing basis every one of those families until their asylum claims are finalized, whatever the outcome might be. And then if they
Which could take a long time.
Yes, and some of them have already had their final proceedings. So some have been deported, some have been allowed to stay in the country and granted asylum. If they are deported, then we have work to try to set them up with resources in their home country, just sort of keep up with all of them. But it has been a really, incredible experience. And to some degree, it was, I don't know how to explain it, but I just every day, would be working on some piece of this. Let me find a driver to take someone from Omaha to Des Moines or whatever. Let me find a hotel where I can put this person, and I need someone with an ID and a credit card who will physically take them there. So this put me in the path of so many Americans who care and who helped and who did something small, medium, or large to their family. I mean, some of these people took families in completely, and they lived with them for a year or two. So still are living with them. So it gave me so much love and hope for this country at a time when I had really just about lost it. And but there is a lot of love and hope involved. There's also just absolute devastation, and the most recent revelations about the forced hysterectomies in ICE are something that had been on our radar all this time. We had been collecting medical abuses, and I think it was that particular thing was something that most journalists who we talked to about it all, they felt it was too far out there. People didn't, thank God for this whistleblower nurse, because people just couldn't believe that was happening, but that was and probably is happening. And not just in one facility, in many, many ICE facilities. And so it's a really, an incredibly bleak moment. And the fact that there hasn't been more of an uproar over that particular piece is shocking.
Yes. Is it?
Yeah, I guess not, but
Um,
That's true.
is it still, and is the organization still able to work right now during the pandemic?
Yes, still going strong.
That's
Slightly
amazing.
slowed down,
Yeah,
partly because, a lot of the people involved, just it's like we were at capacity as humans when
yeah,
this,
yeah. And then
and then
what you
when
thought was capacity, and then
exactly. And so, one of the women who's involved, and she's so amazing, and she just gets so much done. It blows my mind. Her name is Megan Finn, and she runs the Tank, the theater space.
yes, yeah,
And so when COVID hit, almost instantly, she had to fight to keep the tank alive and continue
yeah,
to have to do that. So, that's the thing where like everybody's um, time and availability did sort of shift a bit. So I feel
yeah.
like we're not doing nearly as much as we were doing, but it's still very much alive. And
That's
Julie,
great.
the founder, is still doing it's still her full time, unpaid full time job.
If people who are joining us tonight want to get involved or want to learn more, is there a good place for them to go?
Absolutely. So you can go to our website, Immigrant Families Together. You could also just email me, jcourtneysullivan@gmail.com.
What does the J stand for?
Julie.
Oh, are you just saying that, or does it really?
It really does.
Oh, love it. Okay, we're running out of time, and I want to leave time for people to ask questions. Do you want to ask me anything? Sometimes I like to turn it on the guests and let them be the interviewer.
I want to ask you. Okay, I'm going to ask a question, and there's two different. You can choose how to answer. So, when I worked at Allure, I remember very clearly that I was an assistant, and my boss gave me her friend's memoir that she had written, and she said, "What do you think of this?" And it was her friend's, like, I had a divorce and kind of you know freaked out and decided to leave the world behind and travel the world, and this is my memoir. And I read it, and I was like, oh, I mean, I guess it's good, but I can't imagine anyone would be interested in it. And of course, that book was Eat, Pray, Love.
Oh my God, I can't believe I know that story.
Yeah, I was like, ooh, I mean, I guess.
Oh my God, I'm dying for you right now, and for
know.
your boss.
I know. So, but the thing is, the reason I tell that story is because
Yes.
I feel like I could never be an agent or an editor because I have no sense.
Yeah. No, apparently you cannot.
No, I have no sense of what could work.
No, everybody.
No. Last participant. I hope it wasn't Elizabeth Gilbert.
Everybody in the business has a story like that. I mean, I had a mentor who said to me, like, if you're seeing those projects, that means you're in the game. And that's the most important thing, not
That's
whether
a good way of looking at it.
It was a great consolation to me when I had turned down something that went on to be very big. And it can often be very fun and slightly painful to sit around a table with a bunch of agents and editors and trade stories about all the things that everybody has passed on that have gone on to, sell 1 million copies or sell for $1 million or win a National Book Award or get picked by Oprah. Every one of us has those stories. And so I don't think we always know.
Yeah.
And my feeling is I would not have the things that I pass on because I don't fall just like head over heels passionately in love with.
Yeah.
They weren't mine to sell. They were somebody else's.
That's such a good, I love that.
Like I would not have done as good a job. I wouldn't have thought of that person to sell it to. I wouldn't have helped shepherd it in the same way that I feel like deep in my bones, the things that I fall in love with, I feel like I'm the one. Like
that's lovely.
So
that's a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, well, thank you.
That.
I console myself with that at night when I see the bestseller list, and I'm like, oh, there's that book that I turned down. Okay, I'm gonna take us to some questions. Let's see, I gotta move this here. Okay. Um, are you still living in Brooklyn?
No.
And how long did it take you to write your first book?
Oh, okay. So I am not still living in Brooklyn. I am right now living in Massachusetts in my hometown, which is a novel unto itself. And I don't know how long we will be here, if we will be back, when we will be back. We're renting a house right now. Um, my first novel.
Cast your memory way back.
Actually, it's funny because Brittany, our beloved and my agent, she I was at my mom's. My mom just moved this week, and so my mom was like offloading, the boxes of papers of mine that she no longer wants to tote around with her.
Yes, that
So,
happens.
which is yeah, it's a bummer. So like, can you please just keep those like
A little longer.
But on the top of this one box was this novel I wrote in college called Kate and Amy, which Brittany has read. And and Brittany, talk about agents being just so wonderful and diplomatic. So Brittany, I wrote 2 novels that are not published. And Brittany, just when she read them, she said, I don't see this as your first novel. And what she didn't say out loud was, or your second, third, fourth, published novel. But it was
you never know.
a way to be let down, because you're like, okay, I'll just do something else, and then we'll come back to this one.
And then we'll come back, yes.
But it's funny because my mom, this Kate and Amy had been open. It was like midway through the manuscript when it, on top of the pile. And I started looking at it. I was like, this isn't that bad. And then my mom was like, so what ended up happening with Amy and that guy? And I'm like, oh, it was 20 years ago that I wrote that, but she had been just perusing it, I guess. And
that's hilarious.
So those novels are in a drawer or now in the basement with me. But my first published novel, Commencement, I think it probably took maybe 3 years. But not even, I wasn't working at an even pace. My first year was a lot of stops and starts. And then I think I really kind of picked up steam and wrote most of it in about a year. And then there was just a lot of revising that went into it.
Always is, right?
Yeah.
Yes. That's the secret people don't realize. Like,
the beautiful thing about, if you really want to have fun writing a novel, don't try to publish a novel, because the most fun I ever had writing a novel were the 2 that were in the drawer that nobody's read besides me, Brittany, and my mom. And we all think, that's great.
They're amazing. That's hilarious. Okay, here's another good question. This person says, I've been thinking a lot about the blind spots we have. It seems to me that both women in this novel have blind spots. Elizabeth has a blind spot about her family wealth. Even though she and her father don't get along, she knows that if she's ever in trouble, she'll be provided for. But I think Sam has a blind spot too. She doesn't quite grasp how lonely and isolating new motherhood is, especially for Elizabeth. Yeah, she really thinks that like Elizabeth hasn't made, her life is so perfect. And she doesn't grasp the emotional comfort that she provides to Elizabeth. Do you agree, disagree?
Love that question. That's so interesting because certainly, I've thought about Elizabeth's blind spot just as you describe a lot. And it's really apparent to me, but from Sam's point of view, I hadn't really thought about it, but it's so true. Because, I can remember when I was young, my mom, whenever she would be telling me a story about anyone's horrible situation in life, this person is very ill or this person has had this horrible thing befall them, I would always say, is she married? Is she married? I always felt, okay, but if she has like a spouse, then everything is
it's all okay. Wow.
Like certain things, right? That like you just, I don't know. And so I think Sam is that way where she's like, okay, but you have a really nice house, you have a really cute baby, you have a nice husband, so you're good.
What could possibly be wrong? Yeah.
Right? What could possibly be wrong? And so I do think that she certainly does have that blind spot because she's really only seeing the exterior of Elizabeth's life. And Sam also has a real blind spot about the women she works with in the dining hall. I think my work with immigrant families together informed this book in the same way that my friendship with Deanne Dunning informed this book, you won't see it in the pages, but it's there. And what's there from my work with IFT is that, you know, I lived in New York for so many years as someone who had paid my own way through college, had, you know, never had family money given to me for rent or whatever it was. And so many people I knew in New York, that was their reality. And so I did have this kind of chip on my shoulder for quite a while, I would say, thinking, you know, but I've had to do this all by myself, you know, and they have. And that's just not true. You know, I didn't have to do it all by myself. I have a safety net, even if I did not have money handed to me. And Sam can see that Elizabeth has a safety net, which is this.
But she can't see her own.
Can't see her own, exactly.
Yeah.
And
the options that she has. And when she thinks she's speaking up to help other people, she doesn't realize the luxury she has of being somebody who can speak up and not risk anything.
And she's, you know, I think meeting these women who have come from El Salvador, Guatemala, and risked everything in their lives, they do not have a safety net.
Right.
In fact, they cross the border into the US and they are immediately expected to be the safety net for their family back home.
For their family at home, right?
And so that was kind of astonishing to me to, you know, I mean, of course we all understand that cognitively and know that, but there's something about, you know, interacting with someone where we would say to someone like, well, so what was your plan? You know, where were you going to live? And they're like, I don't know, you know, but I just needed to get here.
I know it was just bad enough that I had to go.
Yes. Yeah. And so that sense of living so close to the bone and, you know, Sam, like me, is someone who knows she's not going to have this huge inheritance, but will she ever spend a night in a homeless shelter? Definitely not, because there's always a door she can knock on.
Yeah.
No matter how bad things get, and that door will open. And that's not true for everyone.
Especially now.
And I think the other thing is, you know, like Gloria Steinem has that wonderful quote that she always says, that when she was in college, she was in I think geology class, and you know, they were out like in the woods, and she saw this turtle that was going up a hill toward the road, and she said, oh no. And so she took the turtle and you know, ran downhill with it and put it back in the water. And then her professor said, what are you doing? You know, that's how turtles lay their eggs. They go down the ground. And so she always has said, you know, like her life lesson is always ask the turtle. Don't just presume you know what's best for someone else. And I think both women in this book suffer from that.
Excellent words to live by. I think we will close on that perfect note. Everybody always asks the turtle. I have been talking with the incredibly wonderful and talented Courtney Sullivan. This is her latest novel. I urge you all to go get it. You can listen to it on audio. You can order the hardcover. You can get it from the library. Please consider using bookshop.org, which supports independent booksellers, because Amazon does not need your money. If you're an audio person, you can listen at libro.fm, which is a great alternative to Audible, since Audible is owned by Amazon. Thank you to all the wonderful people at the JCC for giving me this opportunity to talk with so many wonderful writers. And thank you, Courtney, for joining me tonight.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
So good to see you. Bye, everybody. Bye. Stay safe and wear your mask.